Hi folks, so I want to record a video today just to say welcome to the module and give you a little bit of an introduction to what we're going to be covering over this semester. My name's John Healy, I'm the lecturer. I teach a cost of games course, and on the Masters, my background is that I started out, initially I did product design in college and worked as a design engineer working on medical devices for a number of years before realizing that that really wasn't something that was for me. And so I moved into, I did actually the same master's you're doing, which was at the time MSc in digital games, and it ran alongside the MA in creative digital media. And I did that course and ended up working in a studio in Dublin called Jolt Online Games, where I worked as initially in QA for a few months, and then moved into game design and worked on some Facebook games and some kind of online games. They were called MMORPS, which is like online multiplayer games. That were reasonably successful. We made some kind of interesting games, but we were acquired by GameStop, and it's funny recording this week, given everything going on with GameStop. But we were acquired by GameStop, and eventually the studio was shut down. And I ended up moving over to Cambridge to work in a studio called Jagex, and I worked in their Fun Orb department, which worked on kind of small independent games. Most of my time was spent working on a game called Eight Realms, which is a online sort of strategy game, like kind of like a save for kind of like Facebook, but an online save type game that allowed you to interact with other players and attack them and send armies. After working there for a while, that studio got shut down, that specific part of that internal studio within Jagex. And I moved back to Ireland and I started working in Dundalk IT as a lecturer in game design with no knowledge of how to be a lecturer. This was in 2012. And from there, then I did a year in Dundalk, and then I became the head of games and animation at Pulse College for a couple of years, and then moved to DIT, which is now TU Dublin, and I moved here in 2015. So I've basically been lecturing kind of in the space for the last, it's like 8 years, 9 years at this stage. So hopefully, like what I want to do is hopefully pass on some of my knowledge and my experience, and like that experience of tutoring students and guiding them through the process of becoming game designers and game developers. One thing to know about this module is that it's very much about creating games as systems and thinking about them in that way, and very much like we're sort of open ended. You know, I want to see you create good, interesting work. So if you have ideas for stuff you want to do, chat to me about it. And like if it's not that much of a game, but there's ways we can squint at it and think about it as being a game and meeting the requirements for the module, like the learning outcomes, I'm very open to like chatting about that basically. Like I believe games are a broad church and they encompass many things we experience in our lives. And specifically, like I think games are this medium that we can kind of experience new things and encounter new experiences, and like kind of it's I think a very creative medium, and especially at the minute there's so much going on in the field that I hope you feel the same way. So I want to jump into this now, and a couple of things I'm going to go through in this video that I'm going to keep hopefully fairly short is to chat a little bit about the housekeeping side of things, so how to get in touch with me and how to contact me, and like if you need to get in touch with me, how you do that, and like what I expect from you. Then I'm going to talk about the module structure, which is like the formal elements, and then the indicative structure, which is kind of what we're going to be doing week by week. A caveat on that is like if you have ideas for stuff you want to do, or like if people are really interested in VR or AR or like certain types of games, we can like chat about that, and maybe we end up changing things a little bit to kind of meet the needs of the class a little bit more. And then the module approach, so the sort of things I think are important and the sort of things I hope you get out of the module, and the sort of approach I'll be taking and what I expect from you. So to start off, one kind of key thing is to make sure, like I really want you folks like asking questions and discussing points. Like the whole point of you being here in college together, even though we're all remote at the minute, is that you can talk to one another, discuss points, you can like learn from one another and learn from us as lecturers. We don't always have the answers, and like that's kind of, I suppose, very important that like we bear in mind the fact that like there are limits to our knowledge. There are things we know and things we don't, but discussing them often and like asking the questions are useful ways to tease out what might be approaches to solving them. If you can, I'd recommend taking notes. So like whether this is digitally. I am a big fan of pen and paper, which we'll talk about in a few weeks' time, as to like why I think that's very important. But even beyond that, then think about like blogging or tweeting or Instagram or TikTok or whatever the social media platform of the day kind of is. The other thing is to know, like, you get back what you put in. And in my experience, master students are very motivated. Like, you're here because you want to be. It's a little bit different to undergrad, where sometimes people are just trying to get a degree. Hopefully you're here because you really like care about this and you want to make interesting work. And I'm here to support you in that. So as long as you're participating, I will put in the time and like work with you guys to like do stuff that hopefully creates interesting work at the end of the day. One thing to know and to bear in mind is that, as far as I'm concerned, all deadlines are final. So I will normally put on an assignment brief when the assignment is due, and then I will give the penalty for being late. So normally your grade is decreased by every day you're late, up until if things are more than 2 weeks late, I just don't accept it. The final assignment, however, has a final deadline, and if you don't meet that, it doesn't get graded, basically, and you'll get a 0 for it. And a last point that's really important, because everyone in TU Dublin likes to tell you that like you can contact lecturers by emails at first name dot last name. That doesn't apply to me. There's a couple of other John Healy's in this college, so if you're emailing me, it's john.p.healy@tudublin.ie. And if it's anything official or anything formal, like that's the way to get in touch. You can contact me informally on the Discord. I'm at Johnny John Johns. But if it's anything more formal or anything you need to make me aware of, the email address and the formal email is the best way to do it, because that creates a permanent record within TU Dublin as well. So what I'm going to jump into now is like looking at like the kind of formal module structure. This module is 10 credits. So you're probably all aware of ECTS. They're basically like our European credit transfer system, and they allow us like study in TU Dublin, and what we do here translates into other colleges throughout Europe, and other institutes throughout Europe, and that's also like translated internationally. So if you went to study at NYU in the Game Center or something like that, they'd recognize your 10 ECTS for this module. I think is like 6 credits in the US system. So there's ways that these things are basically worked out. And one thing to bear in mind, this module is basically a third of your semester. So you have game engines as well, which is kind of the other side of this module, which is a bit more technical. We still jump into the tools and we talk a lot about Unity and work on implementing things, but we're also a little bit more interested in like creating fun and making things that are hopefully interesting, basically. And ideally, like as a designer, I really enjoy systemic design, and I think that creates deep and meaningful gameplay. But if you're interested in more experiential design and things, which I think is great as well, I really enjoy playing games that approach kind of the experience of the player from that perspective. This, even thinking about games from a systemic perspective, kind of helps you create those experiences, hopefully. We have 4 hours contact time per week, and that'll broadly be split into like 2 hours lecture and 12 hours self-directed time. So that means outside of class, you're expected to put in a fair amount of work. Okay, so for the work we're putting in class, you're expected to do a fair amount outside of it. One thing to know about that is for the first couple of weeks, my wife is currently sick and is up in Tala Hospital, and I'm currently doing childcare for our 2 boys. So I think I'm currently recording this at it is 10:44 on the 27th of January. So for these first couple of weeks, I was planning week 2 anyway, would just be a video to give you a chance to go to the Global Game Jam. So for these first couple of weeks, I'll probably be giving you videos primarily, and then opening up discussion in the Discord, just because I think my own schedule is going to make it quite tricky for me to actually attend the specific class times. But like, hopefully we'll have some contact time as well, but I'll be in touch about that as well in the coming days. So in terms of assessment, there were 3 projects for this module: a 30%, 20%, and 50%. So the first is a class project. So as an entire class, you're going to create a mini golf world, and each team member within this project is going to design and create 3 levels with a unique theme. So someone might create a fire levels, and like it's all about fire and burning. Someone else might create ice levels, if you feel like creating ice levels, which I hope you don't, but if you do, that's an option to you there. Someone might create desert levels, whatever it is. The idea is that we're going to start off with like kind of and this is next week, I'm going to like build up the base of this project, and then you're going to be able to iterate on it and create kind of your own gameplay within it. Then we're going to do a 2D game. So you're going to create individual single screen 2D games, and you're going to release them on itch.io, which is a convenient platform for releasing games online. And then the final project, you're going to create a game prototype. Ideally, this is for your final project, but there's some flexibility there. If you really want to explore something else and you don't want to tie this to the major project or your final project, that's totally fine as well. And you're okay to do something that is you exploring a topic, even if it doesn't feed into that. This game really, like, a key thing here is to think of like playtesting, iteration. There are things we want to see, like how your evolution as a designer is occurring. So in terms of the indicative structure of the module, it's basically split into 3 kind of 4-week chunks to hopefully make it kind of digestible. To start off, we're going to look at like an introduction to game systems, which is understanding some of the terminology and some of the numeric elements that go into designing games and some of the maths behind it. It's not anything too heavy, but it's a useful sort of primer. And then we're going to jump into like the intro to Unity, like just the basics of using the engine within a 3D space. And that's the first 4 weeks. The second unit is designing game systems. So that's going to be, and 2D and Unity. So we're going to be looking at like how we actually go about creating these compelling systems, and then also how we create 2D games in Unity. And the reason that we do 2D after initially starting off with 3D is that doing 2D in Unity is kind of a hack of 3D, and having some grounding in 3D helps you understand what that difference is. And then the final unit within the module is iterating on game systems, so how we tweak them, how we get feedback from our players, and then 3D tools. So how do we create 3D worlds like to perhaps a higher standard within Unity, and how do we really like kind of, I suppose, push that standard even further than things we might have been doing earlier in the module. This is broadly the weeks broken down, and I'm not going to go into huge detail here, but for this week, this current video is the module intro. There's going to be a video on game economies, and then there'll be a short Unity tutorial as well, which will get us set up with a simple world and a first-person character moving around in that world. One thing we're going to do is jump into Git a little bit, but we might push that out into the lab next week and tie that into the mini-golf stuff and getting that set up. Okay, so that's going to be a chance to get that done. Next week, I'm going to upload a video to YouTube just about building a mini golf course. Okay, so you're going to be using like inputs and collisions and physics and things like that, and kind of get basics for creating what is a very simple game, but it's kind of like something that's fun. And you're going to design your own levels for that as well. Week 3, we're going to look at numeric relationships in games, and we're going to also focus a little bit on like level design, sketching, UI, score, stuff like that. Things I think are quite important of like getting out of the computer sometimes is useful. I think specifically sketching and doing quick drawings and iterating is really useful. And then we're going to kind of finish off this first unit with like the core concepts of system design. What are the elements we tend to see on games that have compelling systems? And then we're going to talk about level design, flow and progression, lighting, particles, post-processing. Okay, those sort of things that really make our levels pop, basically, make them stand out as something of a kind of higher quality. Then we move into kind of 2D phase, which is the middle 4 weeks of the module, and it's designing game systems and 2D in Unity. So we're going to start off with like thinking about how we design smart systems. Okay, so that's like the core of interesting systems. It's kind of like that they're smart at their very core. They're doing things that are interesting. They're well thought out. And then we're going to start doing some 2D level design and character controls and stuff like that. The following week, then week 6, we're going to be designing fun systems. So we're going to look at like how you move from things that are smart and how you make them fun, how you make those systems not just clever, but like kind of that there's interesting aspects, fun things going on there. And then we're going to have an intro to Unity animation. We're going to use Cinemachine and Tilemap, which is going to be how we create our backgrounds, and Cinemachine is kind of going to be how we manage our camera. Week 7, then we're going to design for player agency. So we might have systems that are like really smart and really clever. They might be fun, but there might not be much for the player to do. And what we really want to do is encourage player agency, the player to have input and action within the world of the game. And then in the Unity side of the module that week, we're going to look at UI and AI. So we're going to look at like user interface, artificial intelligence, how we implement those things. Week 8, then we're going to do 2D game playtests. So the entire lecture that week is playtests, and then the lab, we're just going to do iteration and feedback, and then you're going to submit that game at the end of that week. And the final unit of the module is all about like iterating on systems, taking feedback on board, and then the 3D tools within Unity. So in week 9, we're going to look at game feel and system design. And feel is much more the micro, like how a game feels. Like I've also heard this described as like the kinesthetic elements, like the sort of how like if you've played a game like Destiny, how the guns feel great. Okay, that's game feel. And system design is more so everything that surrounds the upgrades and the light system and how you unlock loot and stuff like that. So that's how those two elements interact and how we can think about both of them as being important elements for designing games, or certainly certain types of games. And then 3D level design refresher, and we're going to look a bit at game audio as well that week. At that stage, you're going to be assigned a brief for the final project. And we're then going to have spring break, so you're going to have 2 weeks to work on your design document over that break. When we come back, we're going to do a lecture on playtesting, so how you get feedback from your players and how you really optimize that feedback for improving your game. And then we're going to look at, you're going to do, game design pitches, and we're going to give you feedback on that as well. In the lab, we'll start developing grey boxes, but I do mention gray box a bit. That just means like a level without any textures or visuals. It's a useful way to get feedback on a level and how it feels without distracting players with visuals. Week 11, then we're going to jump into iterating on systems, and that's how we're going to like tweak systems based on the feedback we're getting from players, and we're going to do play tests of your games that week. And then the lab that week is very much like iterating on the game. The last week, we're going to do final module and summary. We're going to have just a lab that helps you on your final project, and then you're going to submit the game a couple of weeks later. Okay, so that's broadly the structure of the module. That's all the stuff we're going to take you through, and hopefully it works out. And hopefully, like if there's stuff there that maybe is missing or things you really want to do, and like I think probably the big thing that's not there is AR and VR. And if that is something you want to do, we can maybe see it. Like if there's places we can fit that in, and that's maybe something we can talk about in a couple of weeks. Or if you have ideas of that sort of stuff, you can maybe post it up on the Discord as well. So moving forward from that, like kind of structured and the more formal elements, for that sort of like indicative, what we expect we'll do. These are more so the things of like how the approach I want you to take and the approach I'm going to take towards the module. So I really want you to come to this module with an open mind and a willingness to learn. Okay, so like games are this really diverse medium. You can look at the work of people like Andrew Yang and like Michael Lutz and like Terry Kavanagh, and you can look at like big studios like Bethesda and I don't know, EA if you want, and Ubisoft that have different ways of approaching games. Okay, and none of those is right or wrong. They're just different approaches. Games is like this really, I think I've probably mentioned it before, but a broad church. Okay, games encompasses a lot of things. Games can be a lot of things. So have an open mind. Don't be like, oh, that's a stupid game because it's for babies to play. Well, like maybe babies have something useful to tell us about how to play games. Okay, and that might be something useful to take on board and to think about. Okay, so hopefully you're all going to module with an open mind and like, you know, you're willing to learn and you want to learn. And like generally that's not an issue I find with master's students. And kind of going on from that, like you're all here because you want to be, and like hopefully have that volunteer attitude. Like get stuck in. If you can help people out in the class, do help them out. If I'm not around to, like if it's outside lab times and I'm not responding on the Discord, if someone knows the answer to a question, please like feel free to post it up. If there's any issues, once I see it, I'll like correct the record. But like generally, hopefully you can like look out for one another. You know, you're there to help each other broadly as students. And that's what I'm expecting from you. And like from my perspective, this module is about creating art. You're going to create games. You're going to create artworks that are mediated through the largely computers. And there's no right or wrong answers. Okay, but there are grades to be given, but those grades will be based on more sort of formal elements than specifically what I believe is a merit. Whether I think it's a good game or a bad game isn't something I'm going to do, but rather I'll give you feedback on things I think that might be important to consider. Yeah, like one thing I can't do is I can't tell you what a great game is. I can't tell you how to make a successful game. If I could, I would be a billionaire. If anyone could, they would be a billionaire. And anyone who says they can tell you like the steps that you can take to become a great game designer or something, they probably can't do that, but they can help you on the road. Okay, and that's what we're here to do. It's like to give you feedback, to encourage you to invest time in your own practice and to think about how you approach games and the things you want to get out of it. And above all else, this class is largely about making games. Okay, you're going to make 3 different games throughout this semester, and hopefully this starts you off on like a lifelong practice of making games. And hopefully you create interesting things. This is a game I created at the Global Game Jam in, I want to say it's 2014. And it was just like this sort of platformer in a weird environment. It was just a style and an aesthetic I wanted to try out, and it was okay. It was nothing great, but like it worked. It was functional. It was what I expected, but like it maybe wasn't great. But like if we want to talk bad games, in 2016 I made this game that was just very dull and boring, and it was all about protecting the Earth from asteroids. But this bad game, and probably one that was worse than the one I'd done a couple of years earlier, ended up informing some work that I did with a client. I think a couple of months later I was working with a client on a game around like kind of kinetic energy, like as an educational game, and it ended up being that this formed the basis of that game. And so I was able to take this and learn from it and bring it forward in a way that let me like kind of explore more about the space and make sure I was doing something that was maybe a little more interesting conceptually. So don't be afraid to create stuff that isn't good. I really want you to think about like, just create stuff, just try and do things that you think will be interesting. If you find out they're not interesting, you'll probably learn more in that process than you would if you didn't try and create it. Okay. And the last thing I want to say on that is that the Global Game Jam is coming up this weekend, and I'd like to encourage all of you to go along to the Global Game Jam. You don't have to. You will find there's messages there from Baz about what's involved and how to sign up. But I would strongly encourage you to like spend some time. It's like 48-hour period that you have to make a game, and it's a chance to try things out and test them out. And like if it doesn't work, look, you haven't lost much. But if you don't have the time or the energy to do it, it's no worries either. Like you're gonna have plenty of time to make games over the course of this module. And the other thing is, last thing though, is that like we're using Unity as the engine in this class. And that's because Unity is a very flexible engine. It allows us to approach lots of different games. The other major engine we consider is Unreal Engine, but it tends to be very focused on first person and third person type games. And they're both great engines. Like I teach both of them, but I think Unity is a little more flexible, and that's why I kind of prefer it, especially at this level. It allows us to explore different concepts and different topics in a little bit more of a iterative and collaborative way. And we also use JetBrains as the IDE, and that's because it integrates really well with Unity, and like it gives a lot of features that we maybe don't get from the other IDEs, and it hopefully makes our learning experience a little bit easier. If you're not using it and you're using Visual Studio, it's not any issue, but I would definitely recommend downloading Rider and trying it out. And you can even use the same hotkeys and visual style as Visual Studio and stuff like that. It just gives you some additional functionality, basically. So hopefully that covers the intro to the module, and hopefully you're not all bored to that, and hopefully you're excited to engage in some of the stuff I talked about. I'll be putting up videos over the coming days of like some of those topics I've talked about there, and hopefully you can start kind of working on creating your own games. If you have any questions, please post them in the Discord for the Game Systems channel, and I'll try to get to them as you post them. Thanks very much, and I will see you in a couple of weeks.